Good morning. Is this on? Good morning, everybody. Hello. Good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Paul Grogan, president of the Boston Foundation, and it's a great pleasure to welcome a few of our closest friends here this morning to talk about some very notable developments in the Boston public schools. When people gather together to hear reports on what's going on in urban education, it's often not a positive meeting. So it's a particular pleasure to be associated with what is really almost unqualified good news that we're bringing this morning in the form of the report Getting Closer to the Finish Line by the Center for Labor Market Studies and Andy Sum that will be presented in just a moment. The Boston Foundation is Greater Boston's community foundation, a nearly 100-year-old charity that is the largest grant maker in New England. But in addition to making grants and stewarding a great deal of the philanthropic wealth of this community, we try to play a role in bringing important issues to light, gathering leaders like yourselves together to talk about the implications of what we're finding, and most importantly, catalyzing action. And that's what happened in 2008 when the first version of this report was produced, and the report was frankly embarrassing to many of us, because Boston had been a community for a long time that was patting itself on the back for the very high rates of college enrollment on the part of our graduates. But no one had ever looked at how many of those young people were actually finishing and obtaining a degree. And as we know, that is so important because just going to college for a while, according to the data, doesn't really do very much for you in terms of your employment prospects or the other positive correlations of having that college degree. But the good news is it was catalytic. Instead of the blame game or the finger pointing, we all rolled up our sleeves and went to work. The mayor played a particularly important role here in bringing us together and setting some very tough, ambitious goals for improvement. But what has resulted from that is an extraordinary partnership among the mayor, the city, the school system, higher education, and the nonprofit community and the business community that have worked together to produce the results that we're going to hear about today. And even more importantly, this partnership with what is achieving, I think, gives every prospect that further improvements are possible if we stay the course. So we are very pleased to host this meeting. As many of you know, our ability at the Foundation to commission this research, have forums like this, and do the public policy work comes from the Civic Leadership Fund, our annual fund that supports this work. There are many supporters of the Civic Leadership Fund in this audience. I thank you for your support. Those who would be interested in supporting it can find out how to do so on our website. There are so many distinguished people here. I would like to introduce you all, but that would consume so much time that I've solved the problem by deciding not to introduce anyone, except those who are on the program. First up is the author of this report, to whom we owe just tremendous gratitude, and along with him, of course, Neil Sullivan at the Private Industry Council has been deeply involved in this effort from the beginning, and we're going to hear from Neil later. Dr. Sum is a professor of economics and director of the Center for Labor Market Studies at Northeastern University. He's written numerous articles and books on regional, national, and state labor markets, on the labor market behavior and problems of young adults, and the role of education, literacy, and training in influencing the labor market experiences of adults. And he is the author of the 2008 report that took the first look at this. After Dr. Sum's presentation, we have an outstanding panel that is going to react to what they have heard and talk about the way forward. But first, let's hear from Andy Sum. And I do want to say, you know, there's a continuing discussion in our town about the role of universities and the contributions they ought to make, financial and otherwise. Personally, I believe that the Center for Labor Market Studies and the other centers and institutes at Northeastern and other universities that are focusing on local and regional issues is one of the greatest continuing gifts we are getting from those extraordinary institutions. To be able to draw steadily on the extraordinary intellectual firepower that is in those institutions, as we see today, is doing great good in our community. Andy Sum.
Thank you very much. I thought I would start off, excited to do this presentation yesterday, and so my voice is kind of going, so I'm going to need this mic to help me out here. What I thought I would do at the beginning is just take a few seconds to cite all the individuals who really kind of helped make this report possible. Because in addition to the report, we also wrote 14 separate research papers on topics that I'll make a few mentions on as we go through the presentation. So there's a lot more to this than the work that appears in the report itself. So the individuals, I'd like to thank Ishwar over here, who's really the data guru of the center, who has spent more time over the last few years making sure that that data can be organized and managed, as well as Sheila Palma of my staff, who did a large part of the word processing this report. And then there are four other individuals, Neil Sullivan over here from the Boston PIC, who was a partner with me doing this early work and has contributed to this report. Kamal Shavda from the Boston Public Schools made it possible for us to get access to a lot of the public school data. And Elizabeth Pauley, who did an ending amount of work in making sure that we got the support for getting this out, and Barbara Henley for doing the editing work here at the Boston Foundation. Now, all errors, mistakes, and omissions in this report are due to the above-named individuals.
That was beautiful.
Now, the title of our report is called College Enrollment, Persistence, and Graduation Experiences of Boston Public School Graduates. And my story is going to focus on each of those stories and how they're related to one another. Because I think you need to start with college enrollment, because in order to get graduates, you've got to have enrollees. But in order to get graduates, we also have to keep young people in school, so we need to focus on persistence. And then ultimately, like Paul said, we also want to make sure that we get them out, because the economic returns from getting out are substantially higher than just spending a year or two in school. So there are large economic advantages to do this. And I know we've been talking around the town about how to think about this, and originally it was 3 things, but I said what we're really all about are 5 things. One is helping young people be prepared for college. That's the first thing, making them ready. Second thing is getting them into college. So that's part of what this is about. Third thing is when they get them in, make sure that they stay in, persistence. Fourth thing is persist to the end, so you're a graduate, getting through. We wrote a report on that. And the last one, which is very critical, and I'll just comment on it very quickly now, is also guaranteeing that when they graduate to get into career labor market jobs. The economic return to a 2 or 4 year degree is substantially influenced by what you majored in, whether you get a job that's related to your major, or whether you get a job that's related to the college labor market. And our ability to help young people achieve their dreams, like Governor Patrick said last night in the State of the Union, is to guarantee that we have the jobs waiting for them at the end of the line. In the last 4 or 5 years in our country, we have really let down young people on that measure. So we got to go beyond what the schools do, what we all do. So for each of these measures, we're also going to need a number of measures that I'm going to take you through for enrollment, persistence, and graduation. There's more than one way to measure this. I'll tell you this and tell you what the main findings are and tell you this story, hopefully that I'll do well. Last thing is this, about the case for multiple measures. It's those of you that remember your Bible in Luke chapter 6, verse 36. Luke says, "For the measure that you measure with shall be measured back unto you." So those of you who adopt a measure at so many counts getting you in, not getting you out, may find when you hit the pearly gates that you find a quick way out. Or maybe purgatory for 10,000 years. Okay, now giving that as background, let's just deal with the report, get down to what the facts are here. Okay, I'll just cover this very briefly because we talked about why these educational outcomes are so important. It's not just the economic rewards, but it's also true that there are important social economic impacts from completing a college degree. They include higher rates of marriage, lower rates of out-of-wedlock childbearing, less criminal justice involvement, and very substantial tax advantages. The average college graduate over his or her lifetime will pay between $400,000 and $500,000 more in taxes than his or her peer who left school with only a high school diploma. So there's a lot at stake in the rest of us from guaranteeing that we have a well-educated population. The other thing is that family income inequality has been widening in part due to the gap between the incomes between college-educated and other families. While here in Massachusetts, we still are ranked as the best educated adult population 18 to 64. Now, a few years ago, when I used to work with older worker programs, those of you who have been around workforce development, you'd say, we serve people over 55. And I remember I was writing that report when I was 54. And then when I got to be 56, I say, we got to refer to these as mature worker programs. Okay, but basically the key thing here is that in Mass, we have the highest rated adult education-wise, population education-wise. But over the last 20 years, we have led the nation in the increase in income inequality. So Massachusetts, which used to be a leader, is now one of the laggards. So dealing with this educational issue is also key to our ability to deal with these income inequality measures as we go forward over here. Now, just the last thing on this over here. Over the last few years, and just to highlight these really quickly, the reason why these issues are important is what we have found is that on the one hand, academic achievement gaps between affluent and low-income children have been on the rise. So guaranteeing that our children get the best academic achievement they can in high school is crucial for their success in college. That the college enrollment, college persistence, college graduation rates of young high school grads is substantially improved by their academic achievement. That's true for our city as well, and I'll show that very quickly when we get to that point. That for young people from low-income families, you are most likely to graduate when you have top achievement test scores. If you and I grow up in a low-income family and have low test scores, the likelihood of you and I getting a BA is approximately zero, okay? Approximately zero. Yet on the other hand, if you happen to grow up in a high-income family where mom and dad are college educated and you have strong skills, your probability of a college degree is 85%. That's America today, and you'll see how big some of these gaps are. And the last thing is that intergenerational mobility is becoming more dependent on parent schooling. So given all these important things for the success of young people, their families, the community, our state, what have we been doing and how far have we been advancing here in Massachusetts? So I'm going to start out with a little story about college enrollment. You can measure college enrollment in a lot of different ways. You can measure it at a point in time. You can measure it at, like some of our measures are, did you enroll in the fall after you graduated? Did you enroll in the first year after you graduated? Did you enroll in any given year after high school? And then we also look at cumulative measures. How many of our young people enter college at some time over a given 4, 6, 8, 10, or 12-year period? So you could measure these enrollment patterns in a number of different ways. Now, there are a number of different databases that we use. I don't want to bore you with all these things, but they are important to know where you get your data from. So I'm going to tell you a story about who goes to college and who doesn't, how that's changed. But we also get our data on this from two different surveys. One has been, for the last 25 years, the Boston Private Industry Council has done a survey on the recent high school grads. So in the spring, after the year you graduate, we go out and we try to interview young people to find out whether they're in college and the labor market and how they're doing. The second one that forms a large part of what we're doing is called the National Student Clearinghouse. That's data that's submitted by colleges and universities to the National Student Clearinghouse to tell us about enrollments in school, who's enrolled, how long you stayed, and whether you get a degree. And so we've been relying on that data as well to tell the story about what's happening to Boston's high school grads. Now, part of the story is a little different, but the general trend is overall the same. So this is the main story here for enrollment. If you take a look at the private industry council data, by the way, when I first started out with this, I got a call from the Boston Fed back in 1988, and they asked me, would you review this report? I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to review it. And they began to do this work. When we started out in this field, 50% of our graduates went to college in the first year after high school. So we started from a base of 50. Now, according to the PIC follow-up survey, we generated that rate up to 64% at the end of the 90s. By mid-decade, it was around 69%, and the most recent 2 years average out to about 74. So we've been increasing the college enrollment rate over the past decade by at least 10 percentage points. And by the way, 74 beats the national average on that measure, okay? Then we also collect this data from the National Student Clearinghouse. And with the National Student Clearinghouse, we've been tracking them for the last 5 years. Now, as time has gone by, the National Student Clearinghouse collects better data. They get a better response rate. So part of this gain is due to a better response rate. I'll be honest, that's true. But still, the overall fact is that the college enrollment rate, this is the first year after you graduate, has risen from 61% to 70%. So which of the two measures you look at, anywhere between 70 and 74% of all of our high school graduates enroll in college in the first year after graduation. And the results are clear that we made important gains as we went through the decade. Now the question is who's making it into college and who's not. So I'm just going to tell you a little story about gender by race. Then I'm telling you a story about MCAS, where you went to school, and where you went to college. So I'm going to tell you like 5 little stories here on this. As you can see, over the last 3 years, every gender and race group has improved their college attendance rate. Every one of those rates have gone up. At the same time, however, there still are gaps between them. Women continue to enroll at a higher rate than men do. By the way, women do everything better than men do. Okay. I've got to be honest with you. Okay. Except they don't typically brag about it. Okay. Bring back the hip-hop crowd, right? It's not cool to be smart, okay? Okay, no, but the fact of the matter is that women enroll at a higher rate. By the way, I'm going to show you women graduate at a higher rate than men. They're more likely to go to exam school than men. They persist at a higher rate than men. They're more likely to go to a 4-year school, and they're more likely to graduate. So for all of the young guys in the audience, you got a lot of potential homemakers out there ready to take care of you. Okay, so do your courtship strongly, okay? You got more women to choose from than ever before, okay? All right. Now, the fact of the matter is over here, though, you'll see there are gaps across race ethnic group, 60% for Hispanics to 83% for Asians, okay? Now, it turns out that for each race ethnic group, women are more likely to go to college than men, except for Asians. Asian men are slightly more likely to go to college than Asian women, but those two groups and white women dominate. And the overall gap between them is not small. It's 53% for Hispanic men, and it's 85% for Asian men. And why that finding is also important, all of you from the school system know, is the Latino proportion of all high school students has been rising over the last decade, and is going to continue to rise over the next decade. So our ability to achieve higher college enrollment and graduation rates is going to depend upon doing a much better job for Latino students, particularly for Hispanic men. And that should be one of our priorities as we go forth in this area. Okay, now here's by MCAS score, what's the likelihood that you enrolled in college right after high school? These are from kids that failed the test to advance. And as you can see, there's a very strong link between your MCAS score and whether or not you start college. Those with a failed score only have a 43, those with advanced score have 88. Not only does it affect whether you go to college, but whether you go to a 4-year college. So the likelihood you go to a 4-year college ranges from 11% if you failed to 87% if you achieved an advanced score in that test, which is a difference of 8 to 1 from top to bottom, which is why academic achievement does matter. This is the cumulative college enrollment rate by race ethnic group. Every one of these young people has scored advanced on the MCAS math test. And you notice how high their cumulative college enrollment rates are? Every group is at least 90%, and they're all in the 90 to 94% range. So academic achievement pays off for everybody. Men, women, whites, blacks, Asians, Hispanics, low income, not low income. Non-exam, exam schools. It pays off for everybody, which is why we've got to continue to give it the attention that it deserves. Now, this is just a little story about you go to school, whether you went to one of the 3 exam schools or the other schools. Both groups went up over the last few years. By the way, non-exam schools have been experiencing the highest increase over the last decade. But you could see that exam school grads have about a 30-point advantage over the non-exam schools. So if we're going to make additional progress, it's going to have to come from here. Remember, after all, you can't do much better than 90%. Okay, remember, you only got 10 points to go. And over here, you got 40 points to go. So working on this side is a very important part of this. Now, this one here just says, where do our students go when they go to college? How many go to a 2-year, how many go to a 4-year? Over the last 3 years, anywhere between 70 and 73% of our graduates started out in a 4-year college. By the way, that 70% number is the highest for all of the large urban districts in Massachusetts. So Boston, we send more of our kids to 4-year schools than all of the other large urban districts do in the state. And the share of the community colleges has been rising. So being able to improve the persistence and graduation rate from community colleges will be important to our ability to achieve our long-term goals. Okay? There's just one last little thing about the dynamic nature of college enrollment, and we'll go to the second point. While it is true that 2/3 of the graduates from a given class will start college in the fall right after graduation, very large numbers will continue to enroll for the next 7 to 11 years. Like for the class of 2005, we estimated that about 1,622 graduates entered college in the fall. But over the next 5 years, the total went to 2,345, which is 45% higher. So as time goes by, we attract a lot more young people into the school, especially those from the non-exam schools, Latinos, and African Americans. So we do a better job attracting them in as time goes by. Okay, the last thing I'll say over here is that, in addition, when we tracked the class of 2000, 2003, we found that for 12 years after you left high school, nearly 7% of all high school grads were still working on an AA or BA. So 10 to 12 years later, we got a large share of kids working on their first degree. So if we could continue to work with them even earlier, we could continue to raise the college graduation rate here in Boston. Okay, that's the story about college enrollment. The news, I generally argue, is good news. College rate is up. It's going up over the decade. All the data sources tell the same story. We're raising the college enrollment rates for everybody, but there are important gaps by gender, by race, and by academic achievement. Okay, second story, college persistence. Now, what is college persistence? Well, college persistence, the way we define it, is when I compare any two periods, you either stayed continuously enrolled over this time period, like you were enrolled in the fall of 2000, you were also enrolled in the fall of 2011, and you were also then enrolled in the fall of 2012. Or you get a degree. So if you get a degree, we count you as persistent. So you either stay continuously engaged in college or you persist. And again, you got multiple measures here to choose from: 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. And you could identify persistence behavior for gender, race groups, MCAS groups, and I'm going to tell a little story about the Success Boston story, about what we found out so far here, which I consider to be a very, very set of promising news, but further evidence and information is needed on this as our way of boosting college persistence. Okay, so here's the basic story. Over the last 8 years, we estimated that the 1-year college persistence rate in Boston rose by about 4 points, from 78 to a little over 82%. Almost all that gain, though, was due to 2-year colleges. They increased by 11. 4-year colleges increased by only 1 point, but their rates still stay at around 88% at the end of year 1. So college persistence rates were up. 2-year college persistence rates were also up from 65.8 to 76.4, gain of about 10 points for 2-year college persistence. Then, since then, we've been using a slightly different measure, but it doesn't affect the result, because now we require you on 2-year, you got to be enrolled all the time. You got to be enrolled in year 1, year 2, and at the beginning. And since over the last 2 years, you'll see what the story is that there's been a modest decline in the 2-year college persistence rate. On that new measure, it went from 71 to 69. So it's declined a little, while over the decade, it went up. So the overall decade course is positive. We've been increasing college persistence for a lot of groups. It's just the last 2 years, we appear to have plateaued on that measure. Okay, now what do we know about the size of these? This gives you an example, 1, 2, and 3 year for the class of 2008. For everybody, the persistent rate goes from 82 to 68 to 60, down 22 points. Everybody's rate falls over those 3 years. But you'll note that, again, men drop out at higher rates than women do. And Black and Hispanic youth drop out at higher rates than white and Asian youth do. Here we got a 50% rate for Hispanics, and we got a 77 persistence rate at 3 years for Asians. So our persistence rate gaps stay high for gender and race groups. When you break it out by MCAS reading, 1, 2, and 3 year, no surprise, persistence rates are stayed much stronger, the stronger your skills. The weaker your skills are, the more likely you are to drop out. Those that scored needs improvement went from 70 to 42 on that measure. And advanced went from 93, and they stayed at 84. So persistence is very dependent on how well you come into college with your MCAS reading and math scores. No surprise, the exam school kids have better persistence than the pilot schools and the other schools do. The size of those gaps also widen over time. So our ability to raise graduation is we've got to raise persistence here and here. Okay? The exam school kids continue to persist at a much higher rate. But the key thing here I wanted to tell you is that how well you score on this test matters whether you go to exam school or don't. For all those people that didn't go to the exam school, this is a 2-year persistence. You can see their persistence rate went from 53 for needs improvement to 66 for proficient to 72 if they rescored advanced. So the stronger your scores, the greater is the likelihood you're going to persist in college. But you'll also note that regardless of your scores, the exam school kids persist at a higher rate than those from the other high schools in the city. Okay? And this here is just a story about 2-year and who attended college by type of college attended. The persistence rates between 2 and 4 year also rise substantially over time. At the end of year 1, there's only a 20-point gap. At the end of year 2, there's a 32-point gap, and it goes to 39%. So again, we need to make progress in a number of areas, but raising long-term persistence in 2-year colleges has got to be given a major priority for our agenda in the years ahead. Okay, now this last thing to end this section deals with the information on the Success Boston initiative. What we did is when Nahid was still here at the Boston Foundation working with Elizabeth, they asked us if we could look at experiences of the Success Boston youth that received coaching services. So what we did is we got the names of all the young people in the high schools that received coaching services. And Ishwar then took all those young people and we identified the school colleges they went to. There are 7 colleges that accounted for 85% of all the participants. So we took all those young people in those 7 colleges, okay, and we classified them initially by gender, by race, then we did by MCAS score and where you went to school. And basically what we found was the following. At the end of year 1, the persistence rate, for those of you in the audience that come from the academic side, I know some of you are going to say, Prof, why didn't you do an experiment? Well, I didn't design this, okay? It was given to me. We ought to do more experiments. We ought to do a more careful socioeconomic experiments. These results are so good, I know somebody's going to say, yeah, because it's not a pure control group. That's one thing in the education research literature. Whenever you find something good, they always say, yeah, you had selection bias, okay? You know it's a good experiment when it got a 0 result, okay? Okay. Now that is true, unfortunately, okay? All right, now, but here's the story. The persistence rate for the 1-year students was 20 points higher. By the way, 20 points was a lot higher than I ever expected. I'll be frank with you. And it was very high, you could see, for men, for women, and especially high for Black and Hispanic, who account for about 85% of participants. The year 2 persistence rate was 24 points, and it was more than 20 points for every one of those individuals. So what we did is we took all this data, then we collected data on your MCAS scores, reading and math. We took a look at where you went to high school. We deleted the young people from the exam school. And then we also controlled for what college did you go to. Did you go to Bunker Hill? Did you go to UMass Boston? Did you go to Roxbury Community College? Where did you go to school? And we did that to build this model that predicted whether or not you would persist in college for 1 year or 2 year. And these are the results from that predicted model. The net results are a 17-point impact at year 1. All those results are significant to 0.01. You can see they're very high for Black youth at 22 points and for Hispanic youth at 17. The year 2 persistence rate was significant at 16 points, very big. And it was very high for each of the groups, men, women, Blacks, and Hispanics. Those results are really very promising about what we could do to try to improve persistence through routes other than just academic achievement. So the results to date look to be quite favorable. And Ishwar just finished an analysis of the year 1 for the class of 2010. These are preliminary. But we estimate that we got a 14 percentage point impact for the first year persistence effect for the class of 2010. And again, you can see the results are quite favorable for each group, and the regression-adjusted results are a little bit lower. If I remember, in the ish, 10 to 11%? Yep. 10 to 11%. Okay. So the answer is there are things that we're learning about how we could work together, our schools, our community agencies, and our colleges, providing young people with the types of service to help them get in, stay in, and graduate from college. Now, just this last thing on college persistence, and I'll go quickly to completion. There are a number of things that we could do to improve college persistence. In our other papers, we go through that. The first thing, I've told you this before, so I don't mean to beat it to death. But it's true that on every measure we use, whether you're talking about enrolling, where you enroll, whether you persist, how long you persist, whether you graduate, that math and reading proficiency significantly affect all these outcomes. So the better you score on that, the greater is the likelihood you're going to achieve these outcomes. Second thing we found, again, particularly for kids in community colleges, having some type of scholarship grant or a Pell Grant or some type of scholarship or other financial assistance except loans significantly increased the likelihood you'd persist in college. That was true for all groups, but particularly true for young people in community colleges. Now, there have been a number of experiments that have been tried with this. People have hired H&R Block to do this thing called the FAFSA experiment, where we help them and their families fill out those forms. And we found out you raised the college enrollment persistence rate for those young people who got the help from H&R Block, because the families just didn't have the skills to fill out all of those forms. So there's evidence on this that works. On opportunities for work on campus, is work a good thing or a bad thing? Now, what we find overall in dealing with the PIC, we generally find that if you work in high school, holding everything else constant, you're more likely to go to college, because work helps build skills that also help you perform well in college. But what we found is when you went to college, the results are quite different for 2-year and 4-year. If you went to a 4-year school and you got an on-campus job, you were significantly more likely to persist in school. So work-study jobs do pay off, and there's evidence about it. It pays off nationally as well. However, if you went to a 4-year school and you worked off campus for 20 more hours, it reduced the likelihood you stayed in school. So too much work at the 4-year level hurts you. Okay? On-campus work helps you. And one of the issues we talked about earlier is how can we change the funding formulas to put more jobs for young people on campuses in our community colleges. This individual coaching and case management, I showed you, that works. There's other research that suggests that works. The other thing we need to do is pay more close attention to those that attend part-time, because the evidence shows, it wouldn't be surprising, but part-time students holding everything else equal are consistently more likely to drop out of college before they receive a degree. And that is especially true at the 4-year level, which is why we ought to invest more in those programs to encourage greater degree of risk, a greater degree of course taking by students to keep them on track in college. So the last thing I said there that shows up at community college, and the last topic, it's an interesting finding that was found elsewhere, which is if you went to community college and you worked 20 or more hours off campus, you are significantly more likely to stay enrolled in college. There have been individual studies that have found the same things. So it has a different effect on community colleges. Many people said it helps you with time management, learning how to handle your skills, knowing how to isolate your time to do it. But work and school seem to go together well at the community college and at the 4-year college having work on campus. Okay, now the last thing is, what do we know about college graduation? So this is our last thing on what have we learned about college graduation here. When we analyze college graduation, we count an associate degree, a bachelor degree, or a certificate. If you get any of those 3, then we consider you to be a college grad. Now, we break them out by type, but in the presentation, I'm going to count you as a grad if you achieved any of those. Now, again, with college grads, you can measure them in a number of different ways. You can measure them like we did originally over time. Take a group, track them over time over 7 years. Everybody that went to school, how many got a degree 7 years out? Or you could do what the federal government does. They'd use this cohort approach. So we take everybody who starts in a given year. You are a full-time, first-time student. And then at the 4-year level, we track you for 6 years and now for 7 years. And we ask, how many of those kids got a degree 6 or 7 years later? And for 2-year schools, we take a 3-year and then a 4-year. So we track you for 3 years, do you have a degree? Do you have a degree at the end of 4 years? And you could also then do college grads as a percent of all high school grads, because that takes into effect the impact of enrollment and persistence as well as graduation. We want to know whether or not we're getting a higher share of our students a college degree. So what's the good news and what's the bad news and what needs to be done differently in the future? So these are the main findings. I'm going to tell you overall, then I'll tell a little story by gender, by MCAS, by type of school, and then compare ourselves with the state and nation. So it'll only take about 7 minutes and I'll be done. Okay? Paul pays me by the hour. No overtime. Okay? All right. The first one is when we started out in our first report that we worked with Neil, funded in part by Boston Foundation, what we did is we tracked young people from the class of 2000 who entered college sometime over the next 7 years. And we asked, what percent of you graduated? Now, when we originally did this, it was only a little more than 35. Now, after we got additional data from the clearinghouse, and Ishwar did more of his magic, that ratio did go up, and it's 39.4. But for the more recent graduating classes, we've raised that rate to 44 and then to 47. So on this measure, we have made gains in getting more kids out of school. Now, if I throw out kids that are still in school, what I call active students, that gap gets even bigger. Because more of the kids in the class of 2005 are still in college than is true for the class of 2000. So we're making headway on both of those measures. This is a rate that's equivalent to the national rate on the 6-year cohort. So this is looking at kids that started college in the first year after graduation. How many of them graduated 6 years later? Okay, for the class of 2000, we estimated at 40.6. And then it rose to 46, 47. In the class of 2006, we hit 49.3. That's the all-time high. We just ran the data the other day for the class of 2007. We only have 5.5 years of data. And it is now at 49.2. So it looks as though we'll achieve over 50% this year. Now, just one thing, I think that the 40.6% rate is a little too low. It probably did a little bit better than that because the clearinghouse did not track a number of the kids we know went to school right after graduation. So that rate might be more like a 42, but the fact of the matter is that the rates have been up on that measure. Then we got one more measure we could use, which is how many of your high school graduates have a college degree 6 years after graduation? For the class of 2000, that ratio stood at 26. In the class of 2003, we raised it to 29. We then raised it to nearly 32 for the class of 2005, and we hit a new high for the class of 2006 at 32.5. So 6 years after graduation, about a third of our young people have a degree. Now, there's still a lot of more work that needs to get done. Remember, the mayor had set the goal that for the class of 2009, at 6 years, we would have a 52% graduation rate. And at the end of 9 years for the class of 2011, we'd have a 70% rate. I'm going to come back to that issue. What would it take to get a 70% rate? But here's the basic findings about who's getting their degrees. This is the class of 2007 by gender and race. Did you have a degree by December 2012? Now, again, you could see women are more likely to have a degree than men, 43, 32. And there are large gaps by race ethnic group, from 30 and 31 among Black and Hispanic to 63% for Asian. So we have a nearly 2-to-1 gap race-wise on the graduation rate of that class. Now, what I did in our report, we analyzed this question that said, how many more women got a degree relative to men? So remember, this takes into account, did you go to high school, did you graduate, then did you get a college degree? For the class of 2000, there were 160 women that got a degree for every 100 men. For the class of 2003, it went up to 192. Okay, we got it back down to 161 for the class of 2005. But for the class of 2007 through 5 years, that ratio is now 202. And I expect it to go down because boys are late bloomers and they graduate at a slightly later rate. No, they do, okay? So I still have the confidence we're going to get them back on track. So I expect that rate to be down to about 190. But the important thing is how large those are. Now look, for anybody in the room, I get used to get yelled at by women on this measure, but put it like this. If that ratio was the other way around, and that was men per women, do you know how our TVs would be filled with people saying, what's wrong with Massachusetts when you can't give women a chance at the American dream? And yet we do it for men. What do we say? What can be done? Well, a lot can be done. And so at the end of this, we got to figure out what can we do to reverse that course. And we need women to stand up for men and men to stand up for men. We got more men need more help from everyone to achieve that goal. Okay, see that 202 degree? measure, it varied a lot by race, ethnic group. Among Asians, it was 116 women per 100. Among whites, it was 190. Among Hispanics, it was 253. And among black youth, it was 268. So we got to do a much better job helping bring that ratio down if we're going to achieve our goals. Okay? By the way, it's just to say the other thing for both men and women, the more college-educated women that live in your area, the greater is the likelihood that you marry a college-educated woman. And the more college-educated men that live in your area, the greater is the likelihood you're going to marry a college-educated man. So the answer is you both want to be rooting for more people to get through school, because the gaps in marriage have risen, by the way, dramatically by level of education in our state and across the country. Okay, now let me just go finish the rest of this up. Tell the story. How about the MCAS test score? Okay, so these are class of 2005 graduates, went to college. How many of them got a degree? There you could see by 2011, only 24% were those with a failing score, 38% needs improvement, 81% with an advanced score on that test. Then we just took a look at the next one, this one that says, what you got a scored advance on the MCAS reading test, what's the likelihood you got a degree by 2011? This is by gender and race. And again, you can see for every group how high these ratios are. They range from 68% for black, which needs to be brought up, to 81 to 90% for each of the other groups and women, and men trailing at 73. So high scores matter a lot for everybody. These are the results by type of school you went to and your MCAS reading. Again, if you take a look at all other schools, the likelihood you got a degree goes from 14 points for those who failed to almost 56 for those with advanced, 4 to 1. Those that went to the exam school are more likely to get a degree than those at the other school, even when you control how well they do on the MCAS test. These are graduation rates by where you went to school. Okay, for two-year public for the class of 2005. It was 16% for two-year public, 42% for two-year private, 63% for four-year public, and 67% for four-year private. So this is how we stand on graduation rates about 7 years after you started school based on what school you went to. Okay, now the last thing on this is we also then took a look at the question that says, of all the degrees that we give to BPS kids, how many are received from four-year colleges? Well, that ratio has ranged from 87 to 91% for each of the last 4 years. So what we need to do is raise the share of degrees in our state that are given to young people who make their way through the community college. The reason why we do well in Boston is because we get more kids in four-year schools and they have a higher college graduation rate. We get a much smaller share of our kids into the two-year colleges. So what we need to do is get them in and to get them through and to get them out. And so that's going to be one of our major challenges in the years ahead, particularly for the non-exam school kids and for white and black kids. It's the last little point here, and I'll stop. Remember I told you at the national level we do the six-year cohort graduation for bachelor's degrees and 3 years for associate degree. And for the class of 2004, remember we followed them through 2010, and the class of 2007, two-year college of 2010. What was the overall graduation rate cohort for the U.S.? And the answer was 46.3. 46% of all the kids that started had a degree at the end of that 6-year period. When you break out the data for Massachusetts, we ranked number 1. We were first in the country at 58.1%. 60% of the states in the U.S. were below 50%. But the interesting thing is, where was Boston? And remember I showed you? We were at 49.2. So our 6-year grade was several percentage points above that for the U.S. And we tended to rank above many of the other states around the country. But remember, the mayor has set a goal not for 50%. He set a goal for 70% for the class of 2011. Now, that's a pretty ambitious goal. As you can see, there's no one has come close to 70% at the state level. I don't know what we would find for Weston or Lexington or Brookline. I don't know what we would find. We know that they have very high 4-year starting rates. But the fact of the matter is that 70% goal is extraordinarily ambitious. Nobody has come close to achieving it. But if we're going to achieve that goal, the reason why we beat the U.S. is not because we outgraduated them at every level. That's not true. We only outgraduated them at the 4-year level. We undergraduated the U.S. at the 2-year level. But at the four-year, both private and public, we outgraduated them. And the good thing is, we outgraduated them for Asian, Black, Hispanic, white, men, and women across the board. And that's how we did it. Now, what we got to do is make it possible to do that for all the rest of the individuals. So there's a lot of work that needs to get done. When you take a look at all the findings, there's a lot of positive findings in there on enrollment, on persistence, on graduation, and a lot of positive findings for a number of subgroups. But there's still a lot of more good work that needs to get done. So while all of us believe in education, like the governor again said last night, his charge, education, infrastructure, innovation, that's the way to grow. I said, I'm thinking about running for governor next time. And I'm just going to add in two additional ones. E for employment and O for opportunity. And what's my agenda? E-I-E-I-O. All right, so let me leave on a more somber note, okay? It's not enough to have faith that what we're doing is right. We've got to have good works. And those know that in James' general epistle, chapter 2, James reminds us, "But wilt thou know, O vain man, that faith without works is dead? And by works was faith made perfect. So to keep our confidence and faith and to make it perfect, let's go out and let's do the good works." Okay, thank you.